This is the World Organic News for the week ending 7th of January 2019. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air and recarbonise the soil. A slightly different tack this episode. There's a thing I need to discuss, a bit like the evolution episode, which was episode 144. Links to the blog and the audio in the show notes. I'm going to cover a concept we've been sold but might not be in our best interests. But before we get there, this is episode 150. I'm so pleased so many of you are still on the journey with me. It means much. I'd be publishing the show anyway, as it really helps me to clarify what I'm doing on the ground. But to know people are listening is just wonderful. A friend sent me a link someone had sent him that has World Organic News on a website called Topical Talks. World Organic News is one of the podcasts they recommend on climate change. So I'm surprised and proud by the reach of this show. To all of you who have left ratings and reviews, who passed on links to friends, and who have contacted me over what is nearly a 3-year run of the show, thank you so much. And now to the business at hand. The idea of efficiency is problematic, let me say. Our first post, entitled Empty Cow Barns Filled with Milking Goats, is from the Western Producer. Quote, when Andres and Ellen Bosma direct newcomers to Bosma Goat Dairy, they are sure to tell them to turn into the laneway with the Holstein cow painted on the sign. People have been known to drive by, which is an understandable mistake, end quote. What we have here is a cow dairy converted to a goat enterprise. As the farm succession occurred, first a brother ran the Holsteins, then they and the quota were sold, and the couple, Andres and Ellen, tried their hand at calf to heifer raising, which was a far more volatile market than they were expecting or were comfortable living with. The move into goats, Sarnans in particular, seems like a way around the quotas, market regulations and so on for cow's milk. Yet they may be swapping one set of problems for another, which are actually the same problem. Quote, Andres works almost full-time at the farm, other than Saturdays when he makes a 10-minute drive to deliver milk to the processor, Pononka Alta. There it becomes part of a larger supply of goat milk and cheese products shipped across Western Canada. Ellen works about 6 hours a day at a nearby Holstein dairy, end quote. The sale of milk to a processor has the distinct feel of price-taking rather than price-setting. This may or may not be the case with goat farms, and with this goat farm, and I wish them well. The joy that many goats in one place brings is overwhelming. The point, though, I'm attempting to make is this. Selling a commodity will rarely bring long-term financial stability. This is especially so in times of climate variability. And if we toss in the quote from John F. Kennedy, quote, the farmer is the only man in our economy who buys everything at retail, sells everything at wholesale, and pays freight both ways, end quote. The problem is this. The advisory boards, universities and research stations did such a good job in the last half of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th centuries that their word held a certain mystique. Having bred for rust resistance here in Australia and high sugar beet production in the Northern Hemisphere amongst a host of other innovations, the notion of the market in a neoclassical sense, rather than the place where livestock are exchanged for cash, was foisted on the food production industry, and this is especially so in the English-speaking world. Much of Europe, through the EU and the memories of starvation during and after World War II, placed agriculture on a path that was protected from the market. This led to its own distortions, but generally they were on the side of overproduction. Overproduction at guaranteed prices generally do not result in famine. Butter mountains and wine lakes, but not starvation. The US, with its own farm bill designed to support agriculture, has its own distortions too. Something like 80% of farm subsidies going to 3% of the producers. Now, I cannot find where I came across this figure, so I'm afraid I can't give you a reference. If anyone knows the source or a more correct figure, please drop me a line. So subsidies are distorting the market to a point of overproduction. In places where subsidies do not exist, the Cairns Group, for instance, the underlying problem is resulting in debt, farmers leaving the sector, politicians wringing hands, and simultaneously saying the drought will strengthen the sector by removing the weakest 10% of farmers, and also complaining that they need to do something for these 10%. I kid you not, that was a quote from an Australian politician in 2018. Again, I can't track down the link, so please bear with me, or send me the link if you know where it is, so I can publish it. What's been pushed since forever, but with increasing vigour since World War II, is the idea of agricultural efficiency. Part of the body of thought known as laissez-faire economics. Its driving idea is that the most efficient individual enterprise will eventually outcompete everyone else, and to do this they will produce at the lowest possible price for the greatest possible benefit to themselves and as a consequence to society as a whole. A theory on paper that appeals to some. What actually happens is this: an efficiency breakthrough occurs. One enterprise makes a greater profit because they produce more of product X than their fellow farmers. Over the next few years, everyone else does exactly the same thing. More of product X is produced, and because there's more of it, the price falls. Generally, you can assume it will fall to a point below what it was before the efficiency breakthrough. Now, more food at a lower price might be fine for consumers, but it's not real good for the people who are attempting to grow the food and make a living that way themselves. Let me put this in concrete form. I'll use the Australian dairy industry, but the principles are applicable in any sector. So after World War II, most farmers held small herds of Jerseys, Guernseys, Illawarra Shorthorns, and a few had Holsteins. All was nicely regulated with quotas, price controls, compulsory milk supplies to primary schools, and so on. As the market was open to international competition, prices started to fall. If the price drops, you have three options: leave the industry, take a cut in income, or produce more milk more efficiently, and all three options were exercised. The third option is the dangerous one, long term, especially for dairy, which was about to be hit by the low-fat nonsense. But it was the option encouraged by government. Dairy farmers were financially assisted to leave the industry. Get big or get out was the mantra. Most commercial dairies changed over to Holsteins for their volume of production. Some specialised areas stayed with Jerseys for butterfat, but the majority went for volume. It takes not much longer to milk a cow giving 50 litres a day than it does to milk one giving 30. So at the sharp end, volume was seen as the answer. Milk as a commodity, exactly the same everywhere, standardised to 3% butterfat as normal. And this was a great success, in air quotes, in that it achieved what it set out to do: produce more milk more efficiently. The more of something that's produced, the lower its price as a general rule of thumb, demand and supply and that sort of thing. All this combined with the rise of nut juices sold as milk, the decades of low-fat nonsense, increasingly severe droughts, and supermarkets dropping their milk prices and treating milk like a commodity that it was, and the industry is in another of its seemingly perpetual crises. There are ways around this for the individual producer, and it is to specialise. There are dairy farmers making good money from not too large an enterprise where they can still spend time with their herd each day, walk the paddocks with confidence and live a fulfilling debt-free life. So what's the difference? Two things from my observation of these independent dairying enterprises. One, they have very little or no debt. Debt means being beholden to a bank which wants things to be fairly conservative. They'll force you to sell your milk to a processor, take the price that they are giving, and we can all work out the debt repayments and everyone wins, except prices drop as well as rise, and a drop in prices can lead to foreclosure. As my grandmother said, a bank will happily give you an umbrella on a sunny day but demand it back at the first sign of rainfall. So being debt-free or relatively so is the first criterion for getting away from being a commodity price taker. And the second is some sort of vertical integration. Instead of selling their milk to a processor, they do some or all of the processing themselves. This usually means cheese or yogurt production, but a small but growing number of enterprises are selling unhomogenised milk into supermarkets, and so on. Milk that tastes like it did when I was a kid, and yes, it is at a premium price, but what price flavour? The point overall that I'm trying to make is we need to be careful about the word efficiency. It can lead to oversupply and price drops. It can lead to no room for manoeuvre when the weather turns from average to dry. and it also means being a price taker. Think about how to develop your enterprise into a niche business. I'm not just talking dairy. Any agricultural pursuit can be wangled into a niche. Sell the taste from the soil you have, the clean green credentials for your district. Find a story behind your produce, for here lies gold. And on that note, I'll draw episode 150 to a conclusion. Remember, decarbonise the air and recarbonise the soil. So with all of the above in mind and the fact that we live in the 21st century, I'm opening up applications for a regenerative agriculture mastermind group. It will be limited to 12 people. We'll meet weekly online to discuss our successes, challenges, decisions, and where we're going. The wisdom of the crowd applied to this necessary field of endeavour. You can have a look at the intro page and click through to the application at worldorganicnews.com/mastermind-application. There's also a link in the show notes. And of course, the podcasting checklist is still available over at mrjohnmoore.com. A transcript of this episode is available at worldorganicnews.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.